Fast forward to several weeks later, two of our deputies are out in this area conducting our Walk It Like You Talk It program, the community outreach program that I implemented a few years ago, where I wanted the deputies to get out of their cars that's become an obstacle and get to know the community that they serve. During their interaction with some of the community members, they were informed that our wanted subject was in the area. They come to the area, closing their search a little more narrowly, and when they do, they approach the wanted subject's girlfriend. They inquire whether our wanted subject is inside this small shed, again, just over my shoulder, next to the RV that this whole dispute began over. She says, he may be in there, he may not be in there. I don't know. Well, having reasonable suspicion to believe that a wanted subject is in some place is all we need to force entry into whatever place that may be. But the deputies still slow things down. They start knocking on the shed door, announcing several times over several minutes that if our wanted subject was in there, we wanted him to release himself, surrender himself. Matter of fact, even at the point prior to cutting the padlock that was placed on the shed, they were imploring the individual inside to come out, that if they didn't, one of our deputies was a canine deputy, and they would hate to have the canine be the person to drag him outside the shed. Still no response. They cut the lock, they open the door, they give another warning. We're begging you to give yourself up before we make entry. Again, we have a canine. Don't make the canine be the one that finds you. They go in, the canine who's on a leash goes right to this area. It's just before, remember, this is a very small shed, like an 8x8 shed. It's very cluttered. There's clothes hanging from above. There's not a lot of room to maneuver inside this shed. Just prior to where they had a cot laying was an area where there's a bunch of clothes, a beanbag, and then a blanket. And the dog alerted to right to that area. As the dog is attempting to pull the blanket off our wanted subject, he sits up. He sits up abruptly and points the gun, a firearm, at the two deputies. The two deputies were more than in fear for their lives, more than justified to discharge their firearms at this point. But they choose not to. They showed great restraint and decide to continue to try this brief negotiation with this subject, imploring him to drop the firearm. At some point, he does drop the firearm, and he stands up without the firearm with his hands like this. As they're giving him arrest commands, our wanted subject, our bad guy, changes his mind, decides that's not what he's going to do now. He turns his back away from the deputies and goes to reach either to the same firearm that he just surrendered and placed on the ground, or just next to it, within arm's reach, was an assault-style AR-15 rifle with double magazines in it. Which firearm that was he reaching for? We're not really sure. But at this point, the deputies were left with no choice, and they discharged their firearm, striking the subject several times in the upper torso area. Our bad guy was transported to Tampa General Hospital, where he is in critical condition at this moment. Again, our bad guy is Dwayne Davis. He's 35 years of age. He's a white male. Our warrant was a violation of probation warrant for carrying a concealed firearm, and also ag battery for shooting his relative. This bad guy, this wanted subject, is no stranger to violent behavior. We'll provide you with his criminal history, and also no stranger to carrying a firearm after he was prohibited from carrying firearms because he's a convicted felon. Our two deputies involved, Sergeant Jason Goff, he's been with the Sheriff's Office for 23 years. He's been with the Sheriff's Office since 1998. He has no previous uses of deadly force. Also with him was K-9 Deputy Charles Perdomo. He's been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years, since 1995. He also has no previous uses of deadly force. Again, it's important to us to remain completely transparent in our uses of deadly force, hence why the Florida Department of Law Enforcement will now take over and complete this investigation. You're talking back on April 20th? Today in the shed, no one else was inside. It was just him. No one else was even in the close proximity. It was just him and the deputies. Luckily, our deputies weren't injured. Fortunately, the deputies outside the trailer or outside this shed, these thin aluminum walls in a shed, weren't struck with any rounds either, since the deputies were forced to deploy their service weapons.
So you had mentioned that there was a family member who had told them that he was or wasn't, they didn't know, in the shed at the time. Where was that person when all of this?
Not in close proximity. Exactly where I wasn't sure, but she was never in any type of harm's way. She was far enough away, almost like she didn't want to be involved in that point. I think that's why she wasn't being completely truthful. There was no need, there was no way that he could put that padlock on himself from the outside. So I believe maybe the padlock wasn't to keep him in, the padlock was to keep anyone else from discovering him.
So the family wasn't being completely forthcoming about his whereabouts?
His girlfriend was the one who wasn't being completely forthright, and because of it, some deputies could have lost their life here today. Fortunately, that's not what happened here.
And it strikes me that here we are, I think 26 years removed away from Ricky and Randy being killed at the Tampa Police Department when another person wasn't being forthcoming. Might his girlfriend now face charges for her deception?
Certainly looking into that. Absolutely, that's part of what we're looking into now as part of our latent investigation, working with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. 100%. Someone has to be held accountable. I think we can all agree on that. Everyone has to be accountable for their actions, including her.
Sheriff, why was he at the shed or the motorhome? Does the motorhome and the shed go together, or why was he there?
Good question. We're not sure why that RV's here. It's also in the same property where there's a home. There's this shed where we located our bad guy, and the RV. I don't know if the RV was here just because they were replacing the flooring on it when they got in the argument, and it's here because some work's being done. I'm not exactly sure who owns the RV that this whole argument started over a short time ago, back on April 20th. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Thank you.